Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 26th September 2020, and these are the issues we'll be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is about parliamentary scrutiny. It is about how the parliamentary scrutiny is put on the back burner because of the reducing relevance and gradual marginalization of the parliamentary committees. Now let us look at the larger issue of parliamentary scrutiny as such. So recently, the opposition leaders have pointed out to the government that on an average, 65 to 70% of the bills were referred to standing committees during the previous governments. But over the past 2 years, only 26% of the bills were referred to the standing committees. And they have been passed without any scrutiny by the parliamentary standing committees. So the backdrop for this started when after the 17th Lok Sabha, that is the recent Lok Sabha was formed, parliamentary standing committees have not been constituted and consultations among the parties are still underway. So what happened as a result of this is the bills were passed without committee scrutiny and they were discussed in parliament over durations ranging from 2 to 5 hours, which is simply not sufficient. So given the volume of legislative business, discussing all bills under consideration of parliament on the floor of the house is virtually close to impossible. So these committees act as a platform for discussion which is very detailed on the proposed law. So at least on the principal matters, the assumption is that a small group of lawmakers who assemble on the basis of their proportional strength of individual parties and interests, they all come together, they discuss what is good and what is bad within this law, and they come out with a report. This discussion and deliberation is the tool by which we make parliament an effective legislative body. The next thing that we have to talk about is the executive accountability. Executive accountability to the legislature is enforced through questions in parliament also, which are answered by the ministers. But it is the departmental standing committees that actually do this job on a very elaborate manner. They go one step ahead and hear from senior officials of the government in a closed setting. There will be more detailed discussions, and this mechanism allows parliamentarians to understand the executive processes effectively. It is quite possible that MPs don't have the required experience sometimes. There might be first time MPs who don't have experience with executive. Now, departmental standing committees gives them an opportunity to learn about the Indian executive and learn about the implementation challenges on the ground level from senior officials. If we take a close look at the various tools of parliamentary oversight, we have firstly we have question hour. Recently they have removed question hour citing the pandemic. Secondly, discussions in parliament. Now we have just mentioned that a lot of bills are passed without parliamentary scrutiny and they are just passed by gully tone. Gully tone is when they club various elements of the law without further deliberations and discussions and they pass the bill because they have a majority. The third one is through parliamentary committees. Now we have just cited a statistic that only 26% of the bills are referred to this parliamentary committees and departmental committees, standing committees are sidelined completely. The fourth thing is annual reports. This is the only thing that is working on paper right now. Now when we are talking about the various types of parliamentary committee at place, if we remember our basic lessons, there are generally these are the types of parliamentary committees. One is the departmental related standing committee aligned with specific ministries which examine the performance and budgets apart from the bills and subjects related to those ministries. The next thing is financial committees which are primarily responsible for scrutinizing the expenditure priorities of the government. We then have select committees which are formed for analyzing specific legislations. So these committees will be disbanded after that issue is resolved. And the next thing is administrative committees which are primarily responsible for ensuring the day-to-day activities of the parliament. So they are planned in consultation with the members. Members from both the houses across party lines are represented in the most of these committees, and they act as a mechanism for checks and balances which is visible throughout our constitution. Now the big problem is the marginalization of these various types of committees. So there has been a call recently to say that there is definitely a need to relook at the tenure of these standing committees, because they are elected every year and most of the times they are not elected at all, as we have just discussed, as what happened after the 17th Lok Sabha was formed. So there have been calls to ensure that there is a at least 2-year tenure for each member on any committee, so that that MP develops some expertise on a particular subject. They can contribute to the parliament and legislations in a better way because of the knowledge and experience that they bring to the table. That is the objective of this 2-year tenure. Recently, even CAG's report has mentioned that nearly 1.1 lakh crores of cess and other levies like surcharges, which were supposed to be transferred to the funds for which they were collected, were lying unutilized in the Consolidated Fund of India, and they were not transferred to the relevant funds, and they were not utilized for the purpose for which they were created. This is actually subverting the rule of law. So this is a clear subversion of the mandate that Parliament had with respect to cesses, and there should be certain explanation as to why they are resorting to this sort of activities. Is it a one-time activity because of the pandemic crisis that they want to offset the cesses and other levies and reprioritize the expenses that they want to incur? Certainly, the government can be very transparent about how they are doing this. They owe an explanation to the parliament and also to the people. In the absence of such transparency and accountability mechanisms, India cannot afford to sideline these principles which safeguard our democracy. So the need for referring all bills to committee, longer tenure for members, strengthening committee and adequate research support, all this were mentioned in the 2002 National Commission to review the working of Constitution. So this strengthening of committee system is just one of the aspect of strengthening the parliamentary scrutiny. So all the tools like question hour and other department related standing committees and requirement of attendance of ministers before committees, all this should be mandated. After all, Parliament is the place where we deliberate and discuss various issues and come up with solutions. If the government is sidelining these deliberations and not taking opposition members and the contribution of this MPs into confidence, we are undermining the spirit of democracy. That is the gist of this article according to the author. The next article for the day is regarding the retrospective taxation. The Vodafone case is almost 1 decade old right now, and the Hague Court ruling has finally ruled it in the favor of Vodafone. So let me explain the background of this issue. In Britain, the parent company of Vodafone is registered, and it has a 100% subsidiary called Vodafone International in Netherlands. So it is completely owned by the parent company, which is registered in Britain. Now there is a company called Hutchison SR, or simply known as Hutch, in India. So this company was actually owned by the parent company called Hutchison Whampoa, which is there in Hong Kong. So this Vodafone International that is registered in Netherlands acquired 67% of the stake in Hutchison Whampoa. So what happened is the underlying assets, that is Hutch India, were also acquired by Vodafone. It is here we have to understand the concept of capital gains. Say for example, a person bought a land X at 100 rupees. After a few years, if there is a appreciation in the value of the land and it becomes 1000 rupees, then a percentage of this increase, that is 900 rupees increase, should a percentage of 900 as decided by the government should be paid as capital gains tax by Hutch. So this is the underlying logic in capital gains tax. Now let us understand another concept called bilateral investment treaty. So India had this bilateral investment treaty with Netherlands. That is the reason why Vodafone has chosen Netherlands as the destination by which they'll acquire this Hutch, so that they can escape this capital gains tax. So what is this bilateral investment treaty? Basically, this bilateral investment treaties are agreements between two countries. So they make an agreement in this that they will reciprocate any sort of practice which promotes the investments and also protects the investments of each others in foreign territory. That is, if for example Netherlands company, which is in this case Vodafone, is acquiring certain thing from India, or in this case Hutch, this is a foreign investment of Vodafone Netherlands in India. So as per the bilateral agreement treaty, there should be reciprocal promotion and protection of investment in each other's territory by individuals and companies. So when countries enter into this bilateral investment treaty, they both agree that they'll provide protections to other countries' foreign investments. So a bilateral investment treaty provides major benefits for investors in other countries, including national treatment. That is, they will treat the company of Netherlands on par with the company that is located in India. It will not be treated as a foreign company. So that is national treatment. So it will also ensure fair and equitable treatment, protection from every sort of regulatory overburden and performance requirements for investments. So it will basically ensure ease of doing business. So it is with this hope that Vodafone has chosen Netherlands to buy this company called Hutchison SR, which is there in India. Now when Hutchison Whampoa, which is there in Hong Kong, is selling 67% of the share, obviously Hutchison would be liable to pay this capital gains tax. But what happened in this case is, Indian tax rules, the Income Tax Act, is in such a way that it is the responsibility of Vodafone to collect it from Hutchison SR or Hutchison Whampoa, this capital gains tax, and then submit it to India. Now one might argue that this is a transaction between a company that is registered in Netherlands and one company is registered in Hong Kong. Why is India involving? The reason is the underlying asset, that is Hutch India, has operations very much within our own country. So there is a claim by the Indian government that Vodafone owes 27,900 crores from Vodafone International, which is located in Netherlands. So in 2012, Supreme Court ruled that the Vodafone was not liable to pay any tax over the acquisition of assets in India. They said that we are wrongly interpreting the IT Act, and there is no such provision that the Vodafone International, which is located in Netherlands, is bound to collect tax, and it is the responsibility of the income tax officials to collect the tax. So the UPA government amended the tax laws with a retrospective effect. So what does this retrospective effect mean? It means that it amended the rules in such a way that everything from 1961, the new rules will be amended, and Vodafone is now liable to pay 27,900 crores as per the amended retrospective taxation. So what Netherlands did was, it filed a case in the International Arbitration Tribunal, or the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is located in Hague, and in that case it argued that the bilateral investment treaty is being violated by India. So this court gave a ruling that India's imposition of tax liability is indeed a violation of this bilateral investment treaty. So this fair and equitable principle, based on which the bilateral investment treaty rests upon is being violated in this case.